There are fathers who lose their children to accidents, to illness, to things that arrive without warning and cannot be argued with. And then there are fathers who lose their children to something quieter, something that builds so slowly over so many years that by the time you see it clearly, it is already too late to stop it. His name was Walter, 67 years old, retired teacher, lived alone in a small house in Millhaven, Oregon, the kind of town where everybody knows your car even if they've forgotten your name. He had been married once, for 19 years, to a woman named Carol who had been patient with him longer than patience could reasonably be expected to last. They had one son, Robert, who had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness and absolutely nobody's ability to back down from an argument. The last real conversation Walter and Robert had was on Robert's 29th birthday. It had started over something small, the way the worst ones always do. A comment Walter made about Robert's choices, about his career, about the path he was taking. He had meant it as concern. Robert had heard it as control, and in the specific way that only fathers and sons who are too alike can manage to do. They had both said the exact wrong thing at the exact right momento, do permanent damage. Robert had left. Carol had apologized on his behalf. Walter had sat in the kitchen for a long time afterward looking at the birthday cake nobody had eaten. That was the last time he saw his son for 11 years. The silence was not dramatic. That is the thing about this kind of estrangement that nobody tells you. It doesn't announce itself. There is no single door slam, no single moment you can point to and say, that is when it ended. It just gets quieter and quieter. And then one day you realize that the quiet has been there so long it has started to feel like the furniture. Walter threw himself into routine. He graded papers he no longer had. He read books he didn't remember. He accepted dinner invitations from neighbors and sat at their tables and said the right things and drove home alone and sat in the dark for a while before going to bed. He called Carol sometimes. She was kind. She never said I told you so. She never said you should reach out. She just listened, because that was who she was. And because she understood that some distances can't be crossed until the person on the far side is ready to start walking. Then one night, the night of Robert's 30th birthday, Walter sat down at his desk and wrote a letter. He didn't plan to. He had been sitting there looking at nothing when his hand found a pen, and the pen found paper, and the words came the way words do when they have been trapped somewhere for a very long time. He wrote for 2 hours. He said things in that letter he had never said out loud. About pride, about fear, about how much of what he had called concern was actually something he didn't have a clean name for. About how the argument had replayed in his head so many times he could no longer tell what had actually been said from what he wished he had said instead. He signed it the way he had always signed his son's birthday cards before everything went wrong. Love, Dad. Then he folded it, put it in an envelope, wrote Robert on the front, and put it in the top drawer of his desk, because he didn't know where to send it, or maybe because he wasn't ready yet. The second letter came the following year. Robert's 31st birthday. Same desk, same pen, same 2 hours in the quiet. This one was different. Less about the argument, more about the year that had passed. Walter wrote about the first snow of that winter, about a student he had once taught who had come back to thank him, and how the gratitude had landed strangely because the person he most wanted to show up at his door never did. He wrote about fixing the back fence in September, how he had done it alone, and it had taken 3 times as long, and he had stood back and looked at it afterward and thought about how Robert had always been the one who held the other end of things. He folded that one too, put it in an envelope, Robert on the front, into the drawer. The letters began to accumulate the way time does. Quietly, without asking permission, without making a fuss. By the 5th year, the drawer would not close properly. Walter put a rubber band around the envelopes and moved them to a shoebox on the shelf above his desk. He bought a new shoebox after the 8th year. Carol called him in a Tuesday in March. He knew something was different from the first syllable. She told him carefully, the way she always did things. Robert was not well. Not catastrophically. Not immediately. But the kind of not well that requires you to stop and look at your life and decide what matters and what doesn't before the decision gets made for you. Walter sat very still while she talked. He thanked her when she finished. He put the phone down. He sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then he went to his desk, opened the drawer, and looked at the shoebox. He thought about sending them, all of them, at once, to the address Carol had quietly given him 3 years ago that he had written on a piece of paper and folded inside his wallet without telling anyone. He thought about it for a long time. Then he closed the drawer, because he had decided something. He was going to deliver them himself. Before we continue, if this story is finding you at the right moment, subscribe to the Human Files right now. He didn't go immediately. That would not be true to who Walter was. Walter was a man who needed to prepare for things, who needed to understand what he was walking into before he walked into it. He spent 2 weeks reading every letter again, all 11 of them, spread across his desk in the order they were written, reading them front to back like a book he had written without meaning to. He had not realized until he read them all together how much they told. Not just about Robert, about himself, about how he had softened over 11 years in ways he hadn't noticed while it was happening. How the man who wrote letter 1, still defended, still right, still explaining himself, was almost unrecognizable from the man who wrote letter 11, who simply said, "I miss you. Every single day. I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I would like to try if you will let me." He put them back in the shoebox. He put the shoebox under his arm. He drove to Portland. Robert lived in a second-floor apartment above a hardware store on a street that was neither good nor bad. Just a street. The kind people live on when they are somewhere between where they were and where they are going. Walter sat in his car outside for 40 minutes. He watched people go in and out of the hardware store below. He looked at the window he assumed was Robert's. A lamp was on. A plant on the sill that was getting enough light to survive, but not enough to properly thrive. That detail stayed with him. He got out of the car. He walked up the stairs. He stood outside the door with the shoebox under one arm and his other hand raised and did not knock for a long time. Then he knocked. 3 times. The way he always had when Robert was a child and he was calling him down for dinner. He didn't know he was going to do it that way. His hand just remembered. He heard footsteps. The door opened, and there was his son. Older, thinner than Walter remembered, with something behind his eyes that Walter recognized because he saw it every morning in his own mirror. The specific exhaustion of carrying something for too long without putting it down. They looked at each other for a long time. Neither of them spoke first. Then Walter held out the shoebox. Robert looked at it. "What is this?" he said. Walter's voice, when it came, was steadier than he expected. 11 years, he said. "One for every birthday I missed. I didn't know how to send them, so I brought them instead." Robert did not read them that night. He put the box on his kitchen table and made coffee, and they sat across from each other in the small apartment and talked for 3 hours. Not about the letters, not about the argument, about smaller things first. The way people when they are rebuilding something and they know you have to start with the foundation before you touch the walls. Walter told him about the fence. Robert told him about his work, about the things that had gone well, the things that hadn't. At one point, they were both quiet for a full minute. It was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that 2 people share when they are both realizing that the distance between them is smaller than it looked from far away. At midnight, Walter said he should go. Robert walked him to the door. Walter had his hand on the railing when Robert said, "Dad." Walter turned. Robert was holding the shoebox. "I'll read them," he said. Walter nodded once. He drove home in the dark. He didn't turn on the radio. He just drove. And somewhere on the highway between Portland and Millhaven, he started to cry. Not from sadness. From the specific relief off a man who has been holding his breath for 11 years and has finally been allowed to exhale. Robert read them over 3 days. 1 or 2 at a time. In the mornings before the day had a chancito interrupt. He made coffee. He sat at his kitchen table. He opened the envelopes carefully, the way you handle something that has been waiting a long time to be opened. He read about the first snow, about the fence, about a sunset his father had seen from the back porch that had been too beautiful to experience alone. He read about the year Walter had found an old photo of Robert at age 7 holding a fish they'd caught together at the lake near their old house. A fish so small they'd laughed about it for years, and how Walter had put the photo in his desk and looked at it every day and thought about that lake and that laugh and everything that came after. He read letter 11 last. He sat with it for a long time after he finished. Then he picked up his phone and called his father. Walter answered on the second ring. "I read them," Robert said. Walter said nothing. Just waited. The fish, Robert said finally. And Walter understood immediately. He laughed, the kind of laugh that is very close to crying. So did Robert. And in that moment, in that specific laugh about a fish too small to keep from 30 years ago, 11 years began to fold themselves U-pan, become something smaller than they had been. Not gone, but smaller. Carrie Abel. They didn't fix everything at once. That would not be true, and this is the Human Files, and we only tell you what is true. There were difficult conversations that came later. Things that needed to be said that the letters had not said. Things that needed to be heard that took more than one hearing. There were dinners that were awkward. Phone calls that ended before they should have. Silences that still carried weight. But they kept showing up. Both of them. Walter drove to Portland the first Sunday of every month. Robert came to Millhaven at Thanksgiving. And the second Christmas. And the Christmas after that. Slowly and imperfectly, and without any of the grace that stories usually give. Moments like these. A father and a son rebuilt something from the parts that were left. Not the original thing. That was gone. Something different. Something that knew what it had almost lost. Something that carried that knowledge carefully, every day, like a thing worth protecting. Because it was. Walter died 4 years later. Quietly. In the house in Millhaven. With Robert beside him. After the funeral, when the neighbors had gone and the house was quiet again, Robert sat at his father's desk. He opened the top drawer. Inside was a single envelope. His name on the front. Robert. Just that. He opened it slowly. It was dated 3 weeks earlier. It said, "If you are reading this, then you came. That is all I ever needed to know. I spent 11 years learning how to say what I should have said from the beginning. You are my son. Every version of you. Even the ones I didn't understand. Even the ones that scared me because they were too much like me. I love you without conditions. I should have led with that. I know that now. Better late, your mother always said. She was right about most things. She was right about that. All my love. All of it. Every year of it. Dad." Robert sat at that desk for a long time. The house was very quiet. Outside the window, a town moved the way small towns do, slowly, without drama, without knowing what had just happened inside that room. Robert folded the letter, put it in his chest pocket, and sat with his father one last time in the quiet of the house they had both called home. Some things arrive late, but they still arrive. And when they do, they are worth every year off the waiting. This is the Human Files. Stories that almost went untold. People who almost went unseen. Subscribe, share, and tell us in the comments. Is there someone you need to write that letter to? Not to send, just to write. Start there.